Welcome back, sports fans. Brew and Shaver Sports Podcast, where we just completed Week 10 in college football, in particular in SEC football. Darren, while we still have a ways to go, SEC basketball started today.
It started today, as a matter
of fact. Recording.
As of recording, the DVR, well, actually, that's not true. ESPN Plus is taking care of the Vanderbilt game. I'm not going to pretend it was on. I can't even name the team they're playing, so I'm not going to pretend it was on ESPN or anything like that.
While we're excited for the arrival of SEC basketball, we are focused on SEC football right now because there's so much to talk about as we gear up toward the first ever 12-team playoff, with the SEC title still up for grabs this year. Currently, there are 8 SEC teams in the latest AP Top 25 poll. So the SEC is holding strong, but there's some major games coming up down the road, Darren, and we'll talk about those in just a few moments. But let's rewind back to this past weekend, the Week 10 action. Darren, what was your first takeaway from the games this past weekend?
Well, there may have been something that stood out to me a little bit. Let me think. I am older, my brain. Oh, Vanderbilt being bowl eligible. That kind of stuck out to me. So I think that, thank you. I think I'll make that my first takeaway for this week, because I want to put in perspective from a Vanderbilt perspective. I don't think that's the sentence I was going for there, but we'll keep rolling. What this means. I mean, you're looking at, this is the first time in 6 years that a Vanderbilt team has been bowl eligible. It is the first time since 1955 that Vanderbilt has beaten Alabama, Auburn, and Kentucky in the same season. Has not happened in almost 70 years. It is the first time ever for a Vanderbilt team to pull off a win at Jordan-Hare Stadium, which is absolutely awesome. It's the first 6-win season since 2018. If they win one more game, it will be the first 7-win season since 2013. So more than 10 years that they've had that or reached that kind of mark. But I tell you, another thing I really like is the fact that they're doing small things right. It's not just lucking into a win here or a win there. They're dominating time of possession. They are doing things like the turnover margin. That's the one that really stuck out the most to me when I was looking at the statistics. In 2023, Vanderbilt was -3 for the season in turnover margin. In 2024, through 9 games, they are +6 in turnover margin, a 9 turnover swing in the process of the season. Another thing that stands out is the scoring. They're almost 10 points better per game in 2023 and allowing almost a score less per game in 2024 and allowing almost a score less per game. So it's not just, being bowl eligible was absolutely awesome. First time, again, in 6 years, having 6 wins, the potential to maybe pick up another one, pull off an upset, maybe pick up a couple is absolutely incredible. But what's happening on the field to make this happen is what makes it even more exciting. You're seeing them win games on purpose, not luck into a win, which has sometimes been the case in the past for Vanderbilt. So I'll take it. It's a very exciting weekend, bowl eligible, and love what's going on with the program for this year. Diego Pavia, the whole thing. Just love what they're doing and what they're about this year.
Enjoy every second, my friend.
I am trying hard to. How about you, Ben? What's your first takeaway?
How we are entering into Week 11 and the SEC is still up for grabs. We have Well, a whole bunch of teams with one
Mhm.
loss. Georgia 5-1, A&M 4-1, Tennessee 4-1, LSU 3-1, Texas 3-1, all right up there vying for that top spot. And then knocking on the door is Alabama at 3-2, Ole Miss at 3-2, and your Vanderbilt Commodores at 3-2. So the SEC to go this late in the season, still up for grabs with that many teams in the mix, is absolutely astounding and a testament to the strength of the conference. We're talking a conference that legitimately is solid from top to bottom, with the strides that Vanderbilt has made under Clark Lee. Uh, there's no way you can say you can compare SEC and Big Ten. The Big Ten, the bottom of the Big Ten is just horrible, and so ACC. Let's not even talk about the ACC or the Big 12. Anyway, never mind. I'm not going to go there. Let's talk about some big games that still are on the horizon that will have a great effect on who wins the SEC this year. This weekend, Georgia travels to Ole Miss. Now, if Georgia loses, I think they still can play into the 12-team playoff. Ole Miss loses, it's over. The slim chance that they have right now is over. It's a must win for them. South Carolina goes to Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt wants to try to keep within sight, the SEC title within sights. They've got to win this game. A huge matchup in Alabama and LSU. This is truly a 100% playoff elimination game, because whoever loses this game, they're gone. They're not making the 12-team playoff. Huge game, huge implications. Then the following week, in November 16th, Texas will travel to Arkansas. I know Arkansas has been up and down, and Taylon Green has battled injuries. Don't write off the Hogs yet. That could be a trap game for Texas. LSU's got to go to the Swamp. Tennessee at Georgia, another huge game that could prove to be a playoff elimination game. Then you got the weekend before Thanksgiving, the 23rd, Alabama OU. Vanderbilt's coming to Baton Rouge to play LSU. Imagine if both those teams win all their games leading up to that. That's going to be a massive game, and it might put our friendship to the test. Maybe, maybe. Then you got the Egg Bowl on the 29th, which who knows what could happen in that. I know Mississippi State's defense is horrid. I expect Ole Miss to win that anyway, but it's a rivalry game, so you pay a little bit of attention to those. And then the last game of the season, the huge matchup in College Station, Texas A&M. Then you got Tennessee playing at Vanderbilt. Uh, OU travels to LSU to wrap up the season. So there is so much that can happen, Darren.
Mhm.
This may be one of the more exciting SEC football seasons in recent memory, with so many teams in a position to win the title and so many major games that will decide not just the SEC championship, but who's going to make it from the SEC into the 12-team playoff. This is an incredible season for SEC football.
Think about part of what you said there. Did you honestly, and you can be honest, we're friends, I can take it. Did you honestly ever think you would say the sentence, and when Vanderbilt comes to Baton Rouge, both these teams to still be mathematically in position for the SEC championship? Did you ever think you'd say that sentence? Honestly, it's okay. You can be honest.
How about your second takeaway, Darren?
Well, let me say this
No,
first about your.
hey, man, this no, no. The
Yeah,
answer is
exactly.
no, and that it's just incredible, and I'm so happy for you, and I hope Vanderbilt wins all of their games except when they come to
Except
Baton
Baton
Rouge.
Rouge, absolutely.
But yeah, how about what a great season, a magical season for Vanderbilt, definitely.
And I said that honestly to try to accentuate your point. I mean, even that, what would seem like an unimaginable, an outlandish sentence just a couple of years ago, is a realistic sentence this year. And it's not just that way for Vanderbilt. I mean, all of the teams that you talked about, it is amazing what they've been able to do, how they fought against each other, how incredible. I mean, every single week, just about every game. I mean, there's been some stinkers, but that's it's going to happen. That's just the way it is. But outside of that, I mean, no matter who's lining up against who, it's going to be a fun game to watch. And at this point in the season, to your point, with some with some big consequences on the line for the most part from here on out, no matter who's playing.
Yeah, yeah. If you love SEC football, you love this season.
This is
How
the
about
time.
how about your second takeaway, Darren?
Well, since Vanderbilt played Auburn this week, I really paid a lot more attention to Auburn than maybe I typically would. And so, last week I actually looked at when I was just breaking down pieces of the week. There was so much conversation about Jarquez Hunter and the fact that against Kentucky he had 23 rushes for 278 yards, which is just and but two TDs, just absolutely ridiculous. What an incredible game he had, and there was so much conversation. And I actually heard quite a few people and saw people on social media say, "Where's this guy been? What are you doing, Hugh Freeze?" And so I went back and looked at some of his stats for the season and thought, well, his carries aren't ridiculous. There aren't games where he just completely disappeared, only had, or didn't have any carries. So I don't know that I see the whole thing. But then this week, after having 23 carries for 278 yards against Vanderbilt, he only had 50 yards, which I'd like to give a little bit of credit to the Vanderbilt defense for that. That being said, though, he only had 12 carries. So, how do you go from 23 carries, where you get 278 yards, to 12 carries? How do your carries get cut in half after a week like that? So, it made me start really kind of digging into the numbers in 2023 and 2024, every single time, almost to the carry, that Jarquez Hunter has had 20 or more carries, it has been an Auburn win. He has had over 100 yards every single time, and Auburn as a team has won that game. Anytime he's under 20 carries, which has been a lot, therefore the win-loss record that we're looking at for Hugh Freeze right now, every time he's under 20 carries, and I'm talking even the Missouri game when he had 19 carries, they still lost that game. So every single time to a carry that he is under 20 carries, it is an Auburn loss. And with that being said, he has only been handed the ball 20 or more times twice this entire season. And then on the reverse side of that, not to be disparaging toward Peyton Thorne, but it's very obvious part of what's going on is Hugh Freeze is putting the offense in Peyton Thorne's hand. And that is 2 years of having the offense in Peyton Thorne's hands for the most part, with a 60% completion percentage, throwing at least seven, if not more. He's already at 7, 9 games in, and he had 10 interceptions last year. I now, after really kind of digging into the numbers and seeing that kind of line of demarcation, I, I understand what Auburn fans are saying, and I can't make sense of it either. Knowing that if you put the ball in his hands 20 plus times, he's going to get the yardage and he's going to open up the offense to a place where you can do what you need to do to win. Why in the world are there games when he gets the balls? Let's see. I wanted to just show some of these, just throw out some of these numbers: 4 times, 12 times, 13 times, 12 times. Why do those games even exist? If 20 carries is the magic number, even if that number ends up being proven wrong, put it in his hands. He's shown you 23 carries, 278 yards, 2 touchdowns. He's shown you he can get it done. And yet we're still the very next week cutting his carries in half, only 50 yards. I don't understand, with seemingly his job on the line, what in the world Hugh Freeze is doing with Jarquez Hunter. It makes absolutely, I mean, it works for me as a Vanderbilt fan, especially this week. But outside of that, it makes no sense to me. And I can't understand what's going on.
Yeah, Darren, you think they'd play to one of their strengths. Auburn has been known to have such a potent rushing attack. They've had some great runners come through there, most notably Bo Jackson.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean,
Cadillac Williams. I mean,
50,
yeah.
Yeah, 50 yards against Vanderbilt rushing. And I think you pointed out on 12 carries, only 12 carries there. You think that they'd look at that number 20. Okay, here's where our record changes when this guy gets 20 or more carries.
Exactly.
So great observation there, Darren. Maybe there'll be a open position for an offensive and analyst at Auburn.
If there's a regime change, I don't know. I want to go there with the decisions they're making right now. What's your second takeaway, Ben?
My second takeaway is closely related to that, and that is the rushing game in the SEC. Still, I know we talk about the passing, which I'll talk about in my third takeaway, but especially shout out to Dylan Sampson, who deserves to be in the Heisman Trophy conversation this year. He is putting up some great numbers in the toughest conference in America. Congratulations, 19 rushing touchdowns, which is a Tennessee single season record. He's got 980 yards. Nationally, that only ranks him ninth. So I think that's why people aren't talking about him in the Heisman conversation. But you look at the conference that he's playing in, look at what the guys above him, what conferences are they playing on? What's the competition, the level of competition? I think Dylan Sampson is one of the best running backs out there, definitely one of the top three this season. He's the only SEC player, though, that's in the top 10 nationally in terms of rushing yards, which is staggering for a conference that prides itself on being able to run the ball. Uh, as uh, as my son told me about the importance of running the ball, he's an assistant football coach, high school football coach. He said, three things can happen when you pass the ball, and two of them are bad. So run the ball. Jarquez Hunter is second in the SEC in rushing. Of course, you mentioned his carries have been limited. Who knows? He could be over 1,000 yards right now if they gave him 20 or more carries a game. Le'Veon Moss is third. Unfortunately, that injury in the South Carolina game, he's done for the season. A big blow to A&M, but they've got a guy that's going to, I think, step up big and help them out. But they are going to miss Moss. Henry Parrish from Ole Miss, Jaquindon Jackson from Arkansas, Javante Barnes from OU, Raheem Rocket Sanders from South Carolina. There's only one quarterback on the top 10 rushing list of the SEC. Any guesses who that might be, Darren?
I'm going to say it starts with Diego and ends with Pavia. Am I close?
Diego Pavia. Absolutely. And then he's number 7. Number 8, Nate Noel from Missouri, Davin Booth from Mississippi State. Notice in the top 10 rushers in the SEC, no one from LSU, no one from Alabama, no one from Georgia, no one from Texas, no one from Florida. That blew me away looking at that on paper. Absolutely astounding that those powerhouse teams are having trouble running the ball like they are this year. So let me conclude with this. Let's talk about the top rushing games from week 10. Of course, we got to start with Oklahoma and Norman because they put up 381 yards. I know it was against Maine, but it's still 381 yards. Javante Barnes had 203 yards, a great afternoon for him as OU's trying to get things going. I think they've got some stuff ironed out on offense. I think they're going to be better the rest of the season. South Carolina, though, to me was the most impressive. 286 yards rushing against a Texas A&M defense that the week before only gave up 24 yards to LSU. Defense was really good, and LSU's rushing attack, that goes to show you how horrible it is at this stage, how ineffective. South Carolina, 286 yards. Sanders had 144 of those. Lenore Sellers had 106 of those. Two big guys who are hard to tackle. And then shout out to Mississippi State, 243 yards in their victory against Massachusetts. Johnny Daniels leading the way with 92 yards. So some interesting observations from the SEC this year. The schools that you expect to have top 10 rushers do not have them, but yet we're seeing that if you can run the ball, it puts less pressure on your quarterback, less mistakes, ball control, run the clock, all those things. Now that may work for everybody except Ole Miss. They don't seem to mind if they don't run the ball like they did against Arkansas. They're just going to pass for a zillion yards, but it is what it is, right?
Absolutely. But I think you make some great points. It's really incredible to think about the teams that aren't on that list, but at the same time, then turn around and look at the teams that are on that list that have somebody on the list and how powerful their rushing games are. I mean, it still speaks to the power of an SEC running attack.
Yeah. How about your third takeaway?
I've heard a lot, especially after, let's see, what was it, eight? I think it's 8 interceptions in the last 3 games, I believe is right, for Carson Beck. So I've heard a lot of, we've got a Carson Beck problem, we've got a quarterback problem, uh, and even some praise. I was listening to a Georgia podcast today, and they were praising Mike Bobo with what he's been able to do with the Georgia offense in spite of Carson Beck, which, when you look at Carson Beck's career numbers, is an unreal sentence. That being said, there is something going on, obviously, if you've thrown 8 interceptions in 3 games. But if you dig into the numbers just a little bit and say, okay, not just what's going on with Carson Beck, but maybe why? Why are we throwing the interceptions? Why are we seeing the things that look like forced throws and unnecessary throws that seems to be happening with Carson Beck this season, especially in this stretch of the season? Well, if you look at 2023 versus 2024, his numbers aren't really that far off. But there are a couple of things that stand out. And really, they don't have, outside of the interception number, that obviously stands out. All of 2023, I think he had 6 INTs, and this year he's already at 11. That's obviously a pretty big difference, and you don't want to see that. But outside of that, the things that stood out to me that explain to me why he's doing what he's doing and making the mistakes he's making has to do with what's going on around him. His top 5 receivers last year in 2023: Brock Bowers, Dominic Lovett, Market, I think it's Rosemy Jackson, I hope I'm saying that right, Ladd McConkey, and Ra Thomas. Of those 5 players that were his top 5 targets and had the most yards among all of the receivers last season on Georgia's team, 4 of those 5 are not on the team this year. So 4 of his 5 top targets from last year are not on the team this year. Then when you add to that, in their rushing attack, they are averaging a little over 30 less yards a game on the ground and 1 less score per game on the ground. So when you look at what Carson Beck was working with last year and how the team was functioning, with an incredible rushing attack of almost 135 yards per game, of almost 2 touchdowns per game, throwing to names like Brock Bowers and Ladd McConkey. And then this year, those running numbers are not the same. Those receivers that he was comfortable with are not there. To me, that lets us know what's going on in the head of Carson Beck and why throws are being forced. Why, when you tighten up and start to force things, not only does that lead to lead to the interceptions that we're seeing, I think, but I think it also creates situations where mid-level throws over the middle of the field are coming from a tight arm in a tight situation that's stressed about what's going on or overthinking what's going on, end up being throws in the ground. What would have been a 37-yard, go route, beautiful reception last year, when you're tight and you're overthinking and therefore overthrowing, turns into a 40-yard overthrow, where you miss your receiver by 2 or 3 yards. And I think if you go back and look at what's going on with Carson Beck this year, you see all of those things happening, especially in the last 5 games. I think he's tightened up even more after their loss, because that was new to so many of them to lose during a regular season game. And I think everything he's working through has to do with what's going on around him and not necessarily the defense they're playing, because he's performed just as poorly against Texas at number 1 in the country and Mississippi State at number 127 in the country. So I don't think it has as much to do with the defense he's playing as it has to do with what he's overthinking, which leads to overthrowing, which leads to forcing things, which leads to, I think everything we're seeing right now. So people are correct. It is a Carson Beck problem, but it's not just that all of a sudden a guy that had almost 4,000 yards passing last year has forgotten how to throw a football. I think you have to look a little outside of that, see what else is going on. And I think that shows you what's going on with Carson Beck this year. It is a Carson Beck problem, but if it's here, it's something that can be worked on and worked through, hopefully before the end of the season for Carson Beck as the quarterback and for the Georgia team.
It's raised a lot of concern, particularly among Bulldogs fans.
Absolutely.
You got to imagine that Kirby Smart is addressing this head on.
Yeah.
But it's, as you pointed out, the numbers and the mistakes. It's concerning at this stage in the season.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely, and like I said, hopefully something that can be worked through and worked on for him and for this Georgia team. What's your third takeaway?
So let's talk about the Week 10 top passing games. And I only selected quarterbacks that passed for more than 300 yards. And that top of that list was Jackson Dart, another SEC player who should be right in the middle of the Heisman Trophy consideration. He threw against Arkansas, no slouch, by the way, no. 515 yards, 6 touchdowns. An incredible afternoon. Jordan Watkins, hit one of his receivers, 54 yards, 5 touchdowns. Just phenomenal offensive output. The only other quarterback in the SEC who threw over 300 yards this past weekend was Carson Beck, who threw for 309 yards, 2 touchdowns, and as you mentioned, 3 interceptions. I do want to give an honorable mention to Nico from Tennessee, 292 yards. He was right on the doorstep at 300 and 1 touchdown. But I think Tennessee is so balanced right now offensively. Josh Heupel, for those who are doubting and saying, why isn't he doing this? What's going on with Nico? Josh Heupel he's putting the gumbo together, and the roux is perfect, and now he's adding the ingredients, and I tell you, Tennessee is scary. So, but speaking of passing leaders in the SEC, there's only 2 quarterbacks from the SEC who are ranked in the top 10 nationally in terms of yards. Jackson Dart with over 3,200 yards, 21 touchdowns, only 3 interceptions. Then 7th overall is Garrett Nussmeier, over 2,600 yards, 20 touchdowns, and 9 interceptions. So pretty close numbers to Dart. Dart does much better on protecting the ball, 3 interceptions to 9 interceptions. But overall, when you go from Jackson Dart to Garrett Nussmeier, the next quarterback is Carson Beck with over 2,300 yards, Taylor Green with a little over 2,200 yards. And then there's nobody else that has 2,000 yards passing yet at this stage. Jalen Milroe is knocking on the door with over 1,900. Peyton Thorne over 1,800. Nico over 1,700. Diego over 1,600. Brady Cook over 1,500. Quinn Ewers close to 1,400. So what I think we're seeing is Ole Miss they've got Henry Parrish. They've got some good rushers. But if you're going to try to stop the run game, they're just going to unload on you in the passing game. And they've got a guy in Jackson Dart who can do that and has done that well protecting the ball. Whereas Garrett Nussmeier, we saw against A&M, forcing throws, maybe putting too much on his shoulders. I think right now Tennessee is doing it the best with the balanced attack. Now, Vanderbilt's not going to put up numbers that are going to impress anybody, but they don't need to, because what they're doing is what they need to do to win the ball games. And at the end of the day, you're not playing for personal accolades. You're playing for victories. So, again, just an interesting observation comparing the rushing attacks to the passing attacks. When you think of LSU, or at least until Joe Burrow went there in that 2019 magical season, you think we're going to run the ball, we're going to play good defense.
Yep.
Well, we're in this day and age where passing is what everyone likes to see. It's not as running the ball is not as glamorous, getting 3.5, 4 yards a carry. But anyway, so Jackson Dart needs to be in the Heisman Trophy consideration, as Dylan Sampson.
Yeah. I think those are some great points. And I tell you something that stood out to me, just as when you think about the totality of the season comparative to what we were talking about at the start of the year, it's really interesting how far down on that list Brady Cook is.
Hmm.
Because you honestly, or at least my anticipation at the start of the season was that's a name that's going to be up there. We're going to see him put up some numbers, and it's just never really come to fruition on any level. So it's interesting that he's down in the mix with the rest of the quarterbacks, and same with Jalen Milroe, that he's not in that top 2 or 3 or 4 that we're talking about as far as in the country. He's not top 10 in the country.
Yeah, and then you got schools that, well, South Carolina, Lenore Sellers, they're going to run,
Absolutely.
pass occasionally. You've got freshman guys like Marcel Reed at A&M,
Hmm.
who's
Hmm.
not quite the passer that Wegman is right now at this stage. You've got a Van Buren who's doing pretty well at
Yeah.
Mississippi State passing the ball. Lagway was showing promise at Florida before his hamstring
Ooh,
injury.
yeah.
But hey, speaking of that, Darren, we've got to say something about the environment at Williams-Brice Stadium this past Saturday for
Oh
the
my
South
goodness.
Carolina A&M game. Absolutely phenomenal environment.
Hmm.
One of the best in college football. I don't know how anybody can look at that and say that's not up there as one of the best. But hey, kudos to Shane Beamer. He makes us scratch our heads sometimes, but
Yeah.
yet every year he pulls out a major upset like this.
And the I guess opening of the game, for lack of a better term, when
Mhm.
they come out and stuff, that's on YouTube. Go
Mhm.
find it. I've watched it more than a couple of times. It's yet to stop giving me chills. It's
Yeah.
such an incredible, just a ramp up. And you're exactly right. And I am, just to be selfish as a fan for a minute, I am so thankful this week's game is in Nashville and not in Columbia, because as impressed as I am with the mentality and the toughness of this Vanderbilt team, that's difficult. I mean, Texas A&M showed. I mean, Texas A&M did what they did last week, and then you can't deny that what Columbia does on a Saturday night had an effect on Texas A&M's game. It absolutely did.
Yeah, and there's a reason why SEC schools lobby for night home games.
Absolutely.
The atmospheres at these stadiums, there's nothing like it anywhere else in the country. There
Mhm.
just
Mhm.
isn't. You saw that at A&M when LSU traveled there. You saw that. You see that when LSU hosts a night game. You see that at Alabama when they host a game. It's
Mhm.
just the night games. There's something about them. The home crowd. It's an incredible atmosphere, and I want to say this to our A&M fans. I know they were riding a high after the big LSU victory, and they're in first place in the SEC. This is life in the SEC. It
Yep.
is what it is. South Carolina is a very good team. They're getting shafted by the AP voters. I don't know
Yep.
why they're not in the top 25 with their
Mhm.
resume. Uh, it's going to happen. As we said before, Darren, nobody this year was getting through the SEC undefeated, and
Absolutely.
that was the buzzsaw that A&M ran into, much like LSU ran into the buzzsaw
The week
at
before.
College Station the week before. So it's part of the reason
Absolutely.
we love the SEC as much as we do.
Yep. Absolutely. Great point.
Well, that takes us into four down territory, and this is when we look back at Week 10, and we look we look at we give the Brown Bag Award, which is not really an award;
No.
it's an award of shame. And we have a post game quote of the week before we look ahead to our sure thing pick for Week 11 and our upset pick for the upcoming week. So, Darren, let's talk a little bit about the Brown Bag pick of the week.
Well, I think you and I talked beforehand, and we are going to do. Uh, we don't want to, as I frequently say, we're not trying to pick on or pile on anybody, but I think to use a word that you and I went back and was looking at some other of our episodes over the last 3 or 4 weeks, and you used the word egregious a couple of weeks before I did. I'd like to give that credit. So a word that both of us have used. It is such an egregious thing that we have to point it out, even if we're not going to pile on. And that is the offensive line coach at University of Louisiana Monroe. Happened here in our state, so we've seen a bunch about it, even more than the national coverage. So we have to bring it up. Cameron Blankenship. Like I said, we don't want to pile on. Everybody makes mistakes, but this was such a big thing that's gotten so much attention. We had to bring attention to it. You know, the university spoke out about it. Obviously, it's being handled, but damn, that kind of meltdown on the sideline when it involves a player, and it can't happen, no matter how into or enthusiastic, whatever words you want to put about the game you are. It's just something that can't happen. So that's our brown bag for this week.
Yeah, you appreciate passion,
Absolutely.
teaching moments. We've all seen coaches where they will get in a player's face and yell and holler, and we've all, if you've played sports at some point, you've received one of those spit showers of a coach. I think where he crossed the line, where running after the player and where he put his hands on the player, that's problematic.
Yeah.
That's a line that you're not
Yeah.
supposed to cross as a coach. Hopefully he'll learn from this. Hopefully it won't happen again. So, but it definitely was a concerning scene.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, how about your post game quote of the week, Darren?
Well, you brought up your friend, my friend, and Gamecock Nation's friend, Shane Beamer. And, sometimes when he gets a really big win under his belt, you can tell that in the press conference, even if you don't know the score of the game, because there's some excitement, there's some emotion. He's really devoted to his players. And there's also a little bit of saltiness that sometimes tends to come out after a big win that doesn't necessarily come out as much any other time. So we've got about 90 seconds of Coach Beamer that, well, pretty much shows us all of those. So let's see what Coach Beamer had to say after the big win this week.
Showed up tonight like we knew they would as well. They did all week leading up to this thing, and that place was rocking from the time we got here from the hotel all the way through the game. They had an impact on the game, and I'm so happy for our fans because of how they deserve this and are a true 12th man as well for us there with the impact they make. And then just so happy for our players, especially our seniors, the guys that after last season and the disappointment of finishing 5-7 easily could have bounced and gone somewhere else, whether it be leave early for the NFL, whether it be transfer somewhere else. And they hung in there with us for nights like this. And I'm really freaking happy for them. Guys like Tonka and Boogie and Luke and Vershawn, on and on and on. All these guys that have been here for a long time, and Nicky Manwari probably could have gone anywhere in the country last year as a transfer, and certainly had offers illegally. Well. But a lot of talk about their program, and rightfully so. A lot of talk about how physical they are and how great they are on the line of scrimmage, and rightfully so. But there needs to be some freaking talk about our guys up front and how we played tonight as well. And there was zero talk about that all week, and rightfully so. I get it.
So you saw emotion when he talked about his players, true gratitude when he talked about the fans and showing up no matter what, and then that Shane Beamer throwing out the true 12th man, getting in how good his players were and could have transferred anywhere, because believe me, they had offers illegally. Being able to throw in about how his team wasn't being talked about enough. Boy, it's amazing and that was all in about a 90-second window. It's amazing what he can work into a press conference.
Great editing on that, Darren. One thing I appreciate about Beamer, if you don't like him or not, one of the things I do appreciate is the raw emotion. You don't have to
Absolutely.
wonder what he's thinking. There were things
Absolutely.
like you mentioned, that he just kind of slid in there, that most people, they think it, but it never would come out of their mouth in that moment.
Hmm.
It just comes out of his mouth. And it's like,
Absolutely.
there's a level of authenticity to that. It may rub people the wrong way,
Right.
but I appreciate it. You know where he stands. You know how he feels.
I agree completely. I agree 1,000%. And like you said, sometimes it really gets after people, especially if you hear those comments and you've been on the receiving end of the loss of the big upset that's gotten him so emotional. But you have to appreciate it, no matter what. You have to appreciate it.
And this has been coming for them. They had the heartbreaking loss against LSU.
Hmm.
They should have beat Alabama.
Hmm.
They've been in every game except the Ole Miss game, which is
Yep.
kind of an outlier for the
Yep.
season for them. So kudos to them. And if he
Absolutely.
wants to cast throw a little shade in his victory press conference, to the winner go the spoils.
That's exactly right. Agree completely.
So let's look at this upcoming week. Darren, the slate of SEC games. Did I say ACC?
You
Goodness
said
gracious.
the conference that doesn't even really have games, and you. I feel like Shane Beamer just kind of slid one in there. You messed up, and I took a shot at the ACC, but I'm okay with that. I don't.
Let's talk about the SEC games
There
that
you
are
go.
coming up this weekend. Darren, who's your sure thing pick?
Well, it's really kind of the games were kind of hard to say this is definitively going to be a win, because the ones that are so obvious, you don't want to say, well, that's going to be a win. So when I really dug into the games and looked at them, I feel like Georgia over Ole Miss. That's my sure thing of the week. If for no other reason than, yes, earlier in the year, one of the things that I talked about was the fact that Big Game Lane might not be a deserving title, that he's not necessarily Lane Whiffen, as he's called, because he has won some big games. But the one exception to that is anytime he stands on the sidelines across from Kirby Smart, it just goes downhill in a hurry. And I think that's going to ring true this weekend. So my sure thing pick is Georgia over Ole Miss. How about you, Ben?
Saturday night in Death Valley is a defining moment in the Brian Kelly tenure at LSU.
Great
We've
point.
seen slow starts. It's been frustrating for fans of the program. We don't
Mm-hmm.
understand why certain areas have not developed like we think they should. Hello, running game. Although we're pleased that the strides the defense has taken. Hopefully, take more strides as A&M exposed. You still got a
Mm-hmm.
lot of things to work on, but you got to beat Alabama Saturday.
Yeah.
LSU fans fully expect, with the playoff expansion to 12 teams, that LSU should be vying for a spot in the 12-team playoff every single year. Those are the expectations.
Absolutely.
Brian Kelly says time and time again in interviews, I came to LSU for games like this. Now,
Mm-hmm.
year one, he pulled off a great upset against Alabama.
Mm-hmm.
You win Saturday night, then people think less and less of that horrid opening loss to USC.
Absolutely.
They're going to think less about the disaster at College Station.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't, your team's out of the playoffs. And now people are like, well, do we keep them around for the 2025 recruiting class we have coming in? Is it going to get any better? Or is this the best it's going to get? So, with all that said, that's the longest explanation for a pick that we've ever had on an episode. I'm going to go with LSU. I'm tying my fate to Brian Kelly, and that scares me to death. But hey, go
Nice.
Tigers.
Go Tigers. That's a nice pick.
How about your upset pick of the week?
Well, I shouldn't keep saying it and saying it and saying it, but again, we want to get our picks right. And Vanderbilt has, I've only picked wrong once with them as the upset. South Carolina is coming to Nashville. That makes me feel better about it. So thankful once again that it's not in Columbia, that Vanderbilt will not have to hear Sandstorm. Thank you, SEC scheduling gods. I appreciate that. So with it being in Nashville, with Vanderbilt being able to pull off a win against Auburn, even with people saying they didn't look like the same team, that you could tell there's some injuries, you could tell there's some, and those are things that they can kind of work on during the week. I think the run is going to continue, and they're going to upset South Carolina. So how about you, Ben? What's your upset pick?
I'm going with the Sooners. They're traveling up to Missouri. Eli's Drinkwitz has been a little salty this year. The offense for Missouri has not been clicking. I like that OU made the change with the offensive coordinator that they did. Jackson Arnold is a good quarterback. I think OU gets Missouri here. I think they pull off a big road win.
Oklahoma has the defense that can make it happen. Good pick.
Well, as they say, Boomer.
Sooner.
Be sure to hit that like button, that subscribe button. Particularly if you're an OU fan, we just threw the Boomer Sooner out there for you, so that would mean a lot to us. New episodes will come out usually on Tuesdays, if not, maybe early in the wee hours of Wednesday morning, depending on technical difficulties. But we appreciate you joining us and being a part of the show. It means a lot to us when you subscribe, when you like, when you comment. So keep those up. Enjoy a great week of college football coming up as we go into week 11. SEC is still up for grabs.
That's right.
So sit back, watch the game, have a good time. We'll see you next Tuesday, and make sure that you take care.
Have a great week.
Thank you for making the Brew and Shaver Sports Podcast your go-to sports show. Be sure to subscribe, rate, and review our show if you haven't already. Your feedback is important. Let us know what you think about this week's show. Send an email to brewandshavers@gmail.com or text to our text line 318-390-3599. We look forward to hearing from you. Thank you again for listening to the Brew and Shaver Sports Podcast. See you next week.